A lady was at her local shopping mall, minding her own business and enjoying some much needed retail therapy. She went from shop to shop, just window shopping, and all the salespersons left her alone, which was exactly how she liked it. Soon she was approached by a man in casual clothes who claimed to be a police detective. He told her that someone had broken into her car and that she needed to come down to the station to identify the suspect. The 18-year-old woman was suspicious of this man. She asked for identification to confirm he was whom he said he was. The man brandished a badge, and to the young woman it looked legitimate. She agreed to accompany him down the station. She still had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right, but she decided to go against her instincts. They eventually reached his car, which turned out to be a Volkswagen Beetle. Once they were inside the Beetle together, he started driving. He drove for about 5 minutes before going down a side street. "Are you sure this is the right way?" the lady asked. And quickly, the man's demeanor changed. His smile faded, and his gentle persona that the lady had come to know had now turned sinister. He then decided to pull over on the curb by his school. "What are you doing?" she asked. He quickly and aggressively grabbed her arm and placed a handcuff on her, but he could not get the other cuff on. He then attempted to attack her with a crowbar. The woman's survival instinct kicked in, and she started to defend herself. She reached the handle, swung the door of the VW open, and rolled out onto the road. She then made a run for it, returning back to the shopping mall. At one point, she did look back whilst running, and she saw the Beetle speeding off. She had managed to escape a kidnapping attempt. She was very, very lucky. She reported this incident to the police, and it would begin a downfall for one of the most notorious serial killers. The young lady didn't know it at the time, but she would end up being one of the only people to survive an attack from this man. It was a hot summer's day in a quiet and unassuming city in the west of Australia. Everyone was celebrating Australia Day. Barbecue, beers, and swims at the pool are a common way to spend this day. As the day came to an end, two young housemates tossed a coin in the air. The winner of the coin toss would get to sleep in a hammock out their backyard. The perk of this, of course, was it was a very comfortable and convenient way to escape the heat. Nearby, a middle-aged man who lived alone switched off all of his house lights and headed to bed. A third, elderly and retired man fell asleep on his couch. This city was not prepared for the events that would follow. Following these Australia Day shootings, the city was rife with anxiety and a new sense of security. People who would leave doors unlocked and windows open no longer did so. Those who loved sleeping on their balconies and verandas in the summer no longer had the courage to do so. Weeks went by and police had no suspects. Then one humid and stormy night, an incident occurred. A young girl needed to go to the bathroom, and ever since Australia Day, this is something she had been terrified to do. Why? Because instead of a traditional toilet, this household had an outhouse. What made this especially terrifying for the young girl was that behind the outhouse was an open field. She was especially terrified to go to the outhouse at night in case the man responsible for the shootings would be waiting for her in the field. She held off as long as she could, but she needed to go, so she took a lantern and headed to the outhouse. A big bolt of lightning lights up the open field behind the outhouse. The whole area was illuminating. Standing not far from the girl, she saw a man in dark clothing staring in her direction. She screamed and ran inside. Was this the man responsible for the shootings? The girl didn't know. She just needed to get out of there. For the remainder of the summer, she used a potty and refused to use the outhouse. Weeks later, the little girl came across a newspaper stating that they had caught the man responsible for the Australia Day shootings. No longer did the city have to live in fear as the man confessed to the crimes. He paid the price for murdering 3 innocent strangers and also injuring 2 others in separate incidents. The little girl instantly recognized the man arrested as the same man she saw staring at her from behind her outhouse. Whether his presence there was coincidental or on purpose, she's very glad she got away from him. My dad grew up in a small town called Lubango in southwestern Angola, Africa. He was born in 1961, and as a child, he spent most of his time in the dry, open land, playing with friends, but he also spent a lot of time hunting with his father. This story takes place on the 29th of December, 1983, when my dad was just 22 years old. At this point in his life, he was working for a petrol company, driving a petrol tanker around the town to various petrol stations. Now this day started as any other, usual pickups here and there. At one particular station, however, he parked the tanker and headed inside the station so he could get a newspaper and maybe a possible cigarette, if he was lucky. My dad was familiar with all the different station clerks, and stepping inside this one, he was expecting to see the usual shopkeeper, Roy, but there was no one running the till. My dad assumed he was in the toilet cubicle, so he went to grab a newspaper. It was one from the week prior, which satisfied my dad enough. My dad figured Roy was just in the toilet cubicle and waited around 10 minutes for him to return, but he never did, so my dad decided to return to his truck. He was walking to his tanker as the sound of plane propellers filled the sky. This wasn't unseen, but it was rather unusual in Lubango, so my father decided to lean against the cab of his big rig and watch the planes soar by. My dad was so sad to see the juxtaposition of these destructive army planes with the backdrop of the beautiful Angolan sky. The planes were flying low over the Lubango military base, and my dad concluded there were 2 planes landing in the base after a battle of some sorts. My dad's wondrous expression turned quickly to curiosity as he saw 2 small black dots drop from the bottom of the planes. As the dots fell, my dad's face turned to dread as he watched the 2 planes fly far, far away. His ears and sent him straight into shock. He looked at the fire cloud that surrounded the military base and watched as it crumbled and burned. He laid watching for half an hour as chaos ensued in and around his hometown. This was the moment that Lubango fell. Weeks later, they found Roy's body. It had turned out he had gone on a walk and was found by 2 South African soldiers who decided to interrogate him on the spot. He attempted to escape and retaliate and was shot dead in the process. This was a planned attack by the South African Army called Operation Clinker, and it can be found on the internet, although sadly, little information is written about it. I think this story is very important for people to hear, as the Angolan Civil War is an event in history that took countless lives and isn't talked about nearly enough. I believe people need to be educated on this historic event. A man was driving home from work late at night. He'd lived in this neighborhood for many years. It was a safe neighborhood. You may get occasional petty crimes from troubled youths, but nothing serious. The man arrived at his home, parking on the street as the driveway was full with his wife and daughter's car. The man just happened to peer into his front lawn when he couldn't believe what he saw. Just below his daughter's window, he saw a man. The man was crouched and looked like he was trying to keep very still, but it was obvious that there was someone there. Instantly, the man in the car grabbed the flashlight and ran out of the car and shined it on the mysterious peeping Tom. In the light of the torch, revealed a stranger wearing all black with a balaclava covering his face. The mystery man sprinted away into the darkness. The other man quickly dropped his flashlight and sprinted into the house to make sure his wife and daughter were okay. Thankfully, they were. A few nights later, the daughter was in her bedroom with her boyfriend. He had slept with her each night since the incident took place, as she was in fear that the mystery man could come back. They were discussing the incident when the boyfriend asked, "What would you do if he was outside your window right now?" The daughter didn't respond, and the boyfriend, curious, thought he would open the curtains to make sure everything was safe. Nonchalantly, the boyfriend opened the curtains. To their horror, on the other side of the window stood a man. The man, although initially startled by the opening of the curtain, for a split second stared down the boyfriend. Then, he once again sprinted off into the darkness. Weeks went by, and there were no more incidents. No more mystery man lurking in the darkness. The daughter was finally starting to forget about the incident and move on. But one afternoon, the phone rang and the daughter answered.
Hello? Hello?
Gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you. Gonna kill.
The woman knew this had to be the man lurking outside her bedroom window. He is still following her. The man never called again. They all felt that maybe he was only visiting their town or had moved, because many years went by and he was never heard from again. But for the family, the daughter in particular, life was never the same again. She never truly recovered with the thought of an unidentified, deranged madman who may come back at any time. Our family has been left scarred by the atrocities of an unidentified male who terrorized their home by stalking their premises, making terrifying phone calls, and more. This family weren't the only ones who had to endure the terror that this man brought them. The whole town was brought to a standstill, with many reported burglaries. Sometimes people's homes would be ransacked twice. Yet nobody knew who this man was. Soon after this, the man's crimes escalated to unspeakable atrocities. Then, out of nowhere, everything stopped. No more ransackings, no more sightings, and no more phone calls. People didn't know it at the time, but an incident took place which led to the reason why the man disappeared from the previously quiet town. A man entered the town's local drugstore. Whilst the employees noticed the man, there was nothing overtly suspicious about him. He was well groomed, neatly dressed, and was just casually browsing the store. So it came as a complete shock when two of the store's employees watched as the grown man is seen taking some dog repellent and shoving it down his trousers. The two clerks immediately confront the man and explain to him they saw what he had done. The man smiled and denied the accusations. The employees asked the man to accompany them to the manager's office. The man instead decided to make a run for it, and the employees chased him, tackled him to the ground, and tied him to a chair, and then they called the authorities. The employees discovered that the man also was attempting to steal a hammer. The shoplifter, who seemed desperate to escape, then started doing something unexpected. He started panicking and breathing frantically, claiming that he was having a heart attack. The employees saw right through this and knew that this was a last-ditch effort from the man to try and get away. It did not work. The police arrived and he was arrested and taken away. The most shocking part of this incident was that it was later revealed that this man was a local police officer. He was subsequently fired and left town immediately after everything. But one thing always stuck with one of the employees. Why would a man, a police officer, commit a crime such as petty shoplifting? It was clear he could afford the item he was trying to steal. Why did he need dog repellent and a hammer? And why didn't he want anyone to know that he was purchasing these products? The real reason behind his actions would not come to light for many, many years. The man's crime spree continued across many different locations. He moved from city to city and again escalating to more despicable and depraved actions. Then he disappeared back into the darkness again in 1986. With no fresh evidence, the police could not pinpoint who was guilty of all these crimes. The case was shelved and eventually became a cold case. 32 years later, a police officer took charge of the old cold case and was determined to find, arrest, and charge the man. Eventually, he had nailed down all of their suspects to just one man. The only thing left to do was to acquire his DNA and match it. One day, he was parked outside this man's house, contemplating whether or not to knock on his door. He eventually decided against it, as he thought it could compromise the case. Instead, he decided to keep tabs on him and find the opportune moment to swipe some DNA. A man was in his home, working on his model ship. Working on this for a couple of hours, he determined that he needed some extra parts in order to continue his hobby. So he got in his car and he headed to the local shopping centre. Unbeknownst to him, he was being followed. The man ensured he kept a safe distance so he did not arouse suspicion. The man parked his car and he headed inside. The man on his tail quickly jumped out of his car and swooped on his target's vehicle. He took DNA from the man's door handle and quickly disappeared. The man finished from getting the parts he needed for his model ship. He got in his car and he returned home. 6 days later, the results returned and confirmed all of the police officers' suspicions. It was a match. It was a match to a lot of different crimes, spanning over almost 10 years, and not captured until many, many years later. And so police enforcement headed to the guilty man's residence. He was arrested without any dramatic circumstances. It was over. The police had got their man. Interestingly, he was more worried about the roast he had in the oven than being arrested. The woman who had been stalked and received terrifying phone calls from the man was finally at peace. She had been left scarred and her life had been forever changed from the events she had to endure. The former employees from the drugstore who detained a man for stealing a hammer and a dog repellent were later informed that the man that they had caught was the same man who had been reaping havoc on their town way back in 1975. But the criminal wasn't done. He had one more game plan to play with law enforcement. It is known that when he was in a difficult situation, he is known to feign injury or even fake a heart attack to gain sympathy or to help elude capture. It appeared he was trying this again when he was being sentenced in court. He appeared confused and frail, yet this was later confirmed as fake, as CCTV footage showed him in the prison, exercising and running around freely. His show in the courtroom was all and act, despite evading capture for almost 40 years. The man was eventually undone by modern science and good old-fashioned police work. This animation is a dedication to all the victims that survived and unfortunately passed at the hands of this despicable and awful man. May you all rest in peace, or live in peace.